The coffee maker in the break room had been broken for 11 days, and I knew this because I was the one who'd filed the maintenance request, followed up on it twice, and finally just ordered a replacement unit myself using the office supply budget and the quiet authority that comes from being Westfield Capital's most invisible employee. I was good at invisible. 2 years of arriving at 7:50 every morning, 10 minutes before anyone expected me, had taught me exactly how much space I was allowed to occupy. Enough to be useful, not enough to be noticed. My desk sat at the corner of the 41st floor, positioned so I could see the elevator bank, the glass-walled conference rooms, and the frosted door that led to Archer Westfield's private office. Everything that mattered on this floor passed through my line of sight eventually. I processed it, filed it, scheduled it, flagged it, and then I made myself small again. 43 scheduled calls in the last month, 11 pitch decks formatted and sent. One very awkward conversation with the head of HR, when a junior analyst complained that my emails were too direct. I'd apologized without meaning it, because Archer had built this firm on directness, and if Marcus in equity research couldn't handle a 3-sentence email without his feelings getting bruised, that was a Marcus problem. The intercom on my desk clicked. The Hargrove file. Archer's voice, low and unhurried, the way it always was when he wanted something he assumed would complicate my afternoon. Where are we on the amended disclosure forms? I pressed the button, already with legal. Tab 3. I flagged the section on derivative exposure, because the language conflicts with the SEC's updated guidance from last quarter. A pause. Then, you caught that. You pay me to catch things, Mr. Westfield. Another pause, longer this time. Come in. I gathered the Hargrove file, smoothed the front of my gray blazer, professional, understated, the kind of thing that communicated competence without demanding attention, and pushed open the frosted door. His office was colder than the rest of the floor, the way it always was. Floor-to-ceiling windows faced south, flooding the space with winter light that somehow never seemed warm. Archer stood with his back to me, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city, like he was calculating something the skyline owed him. He was 38. He'd built Westfield Capital from $11 million in seed funding into a $2.4 billion hedge fund in under a decade. He wore the same style of dark suit every day with the same quiet confidence, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. His hair was just long enough to suggest he had more important things to think about than haircuts. Walk me through your reasoning on the derivative language, he said without turning. I knew what this was. He did this, sometimes, asking me to defend a decision he'd already reviewed, watching to see if I'd backpedal or hold the line. I'd learned to hold it. The original language gives us flexibility on the offshore positions, but the SEC's guidance from March makes that flexibility look like a gap if anyone decides to look closely. We don't want to give anyone a reason to look closely. We haven't done anything that warrants scrutiny. That's true. But perception matters as much as reality in a regulatory environment, and I'd rather tighten the language now than explain it later. He turned then, and looked at me the way he sometimes did, not like he was assessing my work, but like he was assessing something else, something he hadn't decided what to do with yet. Have legal rewrite it. Use the language from the Aldbridge filing, same approach, already drafted it. The revision is in the folder behind the yellow tab. Something shifted in his expression. Approval, maybe, or something quieter. Efficient as always, Ro. It was what he'd called me almost from the beginning. Not my full name, not my last name, just Ro, clipped and easy, like I was someone he'd known for years. I never asked him to stop. That's what you pay me for, I said, and turned to leave. The package that arrived this morning. His voice stopped me at the door. Security flagged it. It came through the building's main address, but was addressed specifically to you, care of this office. My hand tightened on the folder. I hadn't ordered anything. I'm not expecting a package. Apparently it's flowers, quite a lot of them. I didn't say anything for a moment. That seems like a mistake. Security doesn't think so. His tone was careful, neutral in a way that wasn't neutral at all. The card is addressed to you by name, first and last. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. I went back to my desk, opened a spreadsheet I'd been building for the Meridian account, and tried to focus on numbers that didn't care about mysterious flowers. The arrangement arrived at my desk 20 minutes later, brought up by one of the building's security team with an expression that suggested he found the whole thing amusing. It was enormous, deep ivory roses, at least 4 dozen, in a black lacquer vase that was worth more than my mother's dining room table. There was a card tucked between the stems, ivory paper, embossed lettering. For the woman who keeps the whole operation running, you deserve to be seen. No signature. Gwen from Investor Relations appeared within 30 seconds, because nothing on the 41st floor escaped Gwen. "Okay, those are insane," she announced. "Who sent them? I have no idea. There's no name?" "No name." I set the card face down. "Probably a vendor. Some firms send gifts to administrative staff. Those are not vendor flowers, Ro." Gwen examined them with the reverence of a woman who had strong opinions about floral arrangements. "Those are. I have been thinking about you specifically, flowers. Those are someone made a decision flowers, Gwen. I'm just saying." After she left, I couldn't stop thinking about the phrasing. You deserve to be seen. It wasn't an accident. Someone had chosen those words deliberately. Someone who either knew me or had studied me, which were 2 very different things, and neither one was entirely comfortable. The afternoon passed with unusual friction. Archer called me in twice for things he could have handled by email. The second time, he stood by the window while I reviewed a term sheet, and I felt his attention tracking me in a way that had nothing to do with the document. When his 4:30 arrived, 3 men from a Chicago-based fund he'd been in quiet negotiations with for months. I heard his voice through the closed door, sharper than usual. At 5:45, his head of security, a broad-shouldered man named Cole, who operated with the conversational warmth of a parking meter, appeared at my desk. "Mr. Westfield would like the flowers moved." I looked up. "Moved where?" "Disposed of." I set down my pen. "They're addressed to me. He's aware. Then he's also aware they're mine to keep or discard." Cole's expression didn't flicker. He was specific. I gathered my things slowly, heart hammering in a way I refused to let show. "Tell him I'll handle it myself." I was still in the elevator lobby when Archer came through the private stairwell door. Not the elevator, the stairs, which meant he'd moved fast and deliberately, and walked directly to the reception desk, where the vase had been relocated while Cole handled logistics. "Get rid of them," he said to the security attendant, quiet and even, the way he said everything that wasn't negotiable. Something hot and sharp moved through me. I stepped forward. "With respect, Mr. Westfield." The words came out steadier than I felt. "Those are my flowers. If anyone's making decisions about them, it's me." He turned. I'd seen Archer Westfield in boardrooms when deals collapsed. I'd seen him in the middle of a regulatory inquiry that could have ended the firm, and he'd looked like he was waiting for the other side to get tired. I had never seen him look the way he looked right now. Controlled, yes, always controlled, but underneath it something that hadn't been carefully considered before it arrived on his face. "You want to keep flowers from someone you can't identify. I want to make my own choices about things that belong to me." I held his gaze, "and I want to understand why it matters to you." The silence between us lasted long enough to become a different kind of conversation, because anything that arrives at this office without going through proper channels is a potential liability. His voice had dropped. "And because I don't know who sent them, which means I don't know what they want, neither do I. But that's my problem to figure out, not yours. Everything that happens to the people in this building is my responsibility." He took a single step toward me, which wasn't much space given the lobby's acoustics and the interested attention of the security attendant, who was now studying a spot on the wall with extraordinary focus. "You work for me. That means your safety is my concern, whether you find it convenient or not. This isn't about safety. The words were out before I could calculate them. This is about something else." His jaw tightened. For 1 second, I thought he was going to say something true, something unscripted. Instead, he stepped back, the shutters coming down clean and efficient as always. "Cole, have the arrangement sent to Ms. Vance's apartment and run a trace on the sender. I want to know who's using this address without authorization." He walked away. I stood in the lobby with my coat half on, surrounded by people who had all very suddenly found other things to look at. "This is insane," I said under my breath. Cole, appearing silently at my shoulder, replied without changing expression, "Mr. Westfield is being remarkably measured. You should see him when he's actually concerned about something. I rode home in the car service that Archer insisted on. A policy I'd argued against 3 times and eventually accepted because the argument cost more energy than the principle. With 48 ivory roses filling the back seat with a scent that was simultaneously beautiful and impossible to ignore. My apartment was a 1-bedroom in Park Slope. I'd chosen it because the light was good, and the landlord was reasonable, and it was far enough from Midtown that I could breathe. The flowers looked absurd on my kitchen counter. The vase alone probably worth more than my coffee table. There was a second card I hadn't noticed, tucked deeper in the arrangement. Different paper, different handwriting, less formal, more deliberate. I've been watching you manage impossible situations with impossible people for quite some time. You're extraordinary, and I think you already know it. I'd very much like the chance to tell you in person. Saturday. I'll have a car sent at 7. Below that, a single initial. N. My phone rang at 9:15. Archer's private line, the number he'd given me 18 months ago for situations that couldn't wait until morning. Did you receive any additional communication? No greeting, no preamble. His voice had a quality I hadn't heard before, coiled. A second card, different handwriting, signed with an initial, and read it to me. I did. Silence. Then, don't respond, don't delete anything. I'm sending coal to your building tonight. That's not necessary. It is necessary. A pause. Lock your door. Check your windows. And row. He almost never said it like that, my nickname, deliberate instead of reflexive. I'll call you tomorrow. Don't go anywhere without letting me know first. He hung up. I forwarded him a photo of both cards. I checked my door, already locked, and my windows. 4th floor, no accessible fire escape, and I stood in my kitchen with 48 roses and a sinking certainty that whoever N was, this wasn't romantic, this was calculated. The next morning, Archer met me in the private conference room on 42 instead of his office. The room was used for exactly 2 kinds of meetings, the kind where NDAs got signed, and the kind where information couldn't leave the building. He was standing when I entered, a folder on the table, shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept. Close the door. I did. Nathan Grigg. He turned to face me, and his expression was the one I recognized from impossible negotiations, contained, precise, already several moves ahead. Does that name mean anything to you? No. His father is Conrad Grigg. They run private equity through a legitimate holding company called Meridian Crest. But the underlying fund structure, he paused. Meridian Crest is the client whose account you've been managing for the last 5 months. Cold moved through me slowly. Conrad and I have a history. 2 years ago, we were in preliminary discussions about a joint venture. It fell apart. Badly. He opened the folder, photographs on the table, time-stamped. A man about my age, dark hair, good suits. A coffee shop I went to on Tuesday mornings because they made their cold brew right. A yoga class I attended on Thursday evenings. Nathan has been in your proximity for approximately 4 months. He's not doing this because he's interested in you. I sat down because my legs made the decision before my mind did. He thinks I have access to your information. He knows you do. You handle the Meridian account. You process their reporting. You schedule the review calls. You have visibility into the fund-level documentation. If he can get close enough to ask the right questions, he can learn things about the other side of the relationship. I stared at the photographs, the coffee shop, the yoga studio. How long have you known he was following me? Since October. Archer set down the folder. When I noticed him at a charity event where you were volunteering with your sister, he asked 2 of my associates about you within 20 minutes. The air in the room felt different suddenly. You've been tracking him. Not a question. I've been protecting you. His voice was flat. There's a difference. From where I'm sitting there isn't much of one. I met his eyes. You've been monitoring my movements. You knew someone was following me, and you didn't tell me. I was hoping to resolve it before it became your problem. It became my problem the minute he put flowers in my lobby. Archer's jaw tightened. He pulled out another set of documents. Nathan Grigg's fund activity, his travel records, a detailed timeline of his movements over the last 4 months. He's going to escalate now that I've made it clear you're not unprotected. He'll try to contact you directly, try to make a case that I'm not worth your loyalty. He'll probably offer you money. For what? For access. Routing details. Names of our counterparties in the European positions, regulatory filings before they're public. Archer closed the folder. He thinks you're undervalued, he'll use that. Frame it as justice, as you finally being recognized for what you do. I thought about the card. You deserve to be seen. He did his homework, I said quietly. He's thorough. Which makes him dangerous. What do you want me to do? He looked at me for a long moment, that look I'd catalogued without ever quite naming, the one that didn't belong in a category I knew how to file. I want you to meet with him. Excuse me? Wired. Monitored. Cole's team in the surrounding area. He moved to the window, hands clasped behind him. Let him make his pitch on record. Let him explicitly offer payment for confidential information. And then we hand the recording to the SEC's Enforcement Division and a federal prosecutor who has been trying to build a case against Conrad Griggs' fund structure for 18 months. I stared at his back. You want me to set him up? I want you to help me end a threat that isn't going away on its own. And if I say no, he turned, then I find another way. One that's less precise and considerably less clean. Nathan Grigg and his father have been using the fund relationship with Westfield to build a parallel intelligence operation, using our client interactions, our reporting schedules, our communication patterns to map out positions they can front-run. His voice went flat and cold. That's securities fraud. That's real harm to real investors. I would like to stop it without starting a war, but I will stop it. I sat with that for a moment. You should have told me in October, I said finally. Yes. The word came out unguarded. I should have. That surprised me enough that I looked at him again. Really looked. Past the Westfield Capital CEO persona, that he wore like a second skin. He looked tired. Not the ordinary tired of someone who worked too many hours, but the tired of someone who had been carrying something at a distance, and was finally close enough to put it down. I have conditions, I said. Name them. You tell me everything from here forward. No more need to know thresholds. If something affects my safety or my work, I hear it. Agreed. And after this is over, we talk. About what you said in October. Choosing to manage this alone instead of telling me. About what this actually is. I gestured between us, a small motion that somehow indicated a very large thing. Because I've been pretending for a long time that I don't know what it is, and I think you have been too. The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't feel empty. Agreed, he said. To both. 3 days of preparation followed. Cole walked me through how to wear a recording device without it being visible under a blazer. Archer reviewed every scenario he could imagine, which was an unsettling number of scenarios. On the second evening, after the rest of the team had gone home, I found him in the 42nd floor conference room going through surveillance images of Nathan at the coffee shop. You don't have to do this, he said from the doorway. He'd lost the jacket, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he looked more like a person and less like a symbol. I know I don't. I'm choosing to. I could find another way. Your other way ends with lawyers and NDAs and Conrad Griggs' fund staying operational while the investigation drags for 3 years. I set down the photograph. This ends it. This puts you across a table from a man who's been following you for 4 months. I sit across tables from difficult people every day. That's literally my job. I looked at him. Archer, I can do this. He crossed the room and stopped on the other side of the table, hands flat on the surface, the way he stood when he was containing something he hadn't decided to release yet. You want to know why I didn't tell you in October? It wasn't a question. I want to understand it, because telling you meant making it real, meant admitting that someone had identified you as a lever to use against me, which means I'd already. He stopped. Started again, quieter. It means that my feelings about you had become visible to someone with the motivation and the resources to act on that information, and I wasn't ready to say that out loud. The room felt smaller. What feelings? I said. He looked at me across the table, and I watched the calculation happen in real time. The part of him that had built a $2 billion fund, by knowing exactly when to hold his position and when to move. You come in every morning and something in the room settles. The words came out measured, deliberate, like he'd been storing them somewhere careful. You ask the question other people are afraid to ask. You're not impressed by money or intimidated by power, which is either the most useful quality in an assistant or the most inconvenient one, and I've been going back and forth on that for about 8 months. He came around the table, not all the way, just enough to change the geometry of the conversation. You take your coffee with exactly 2 sugars, and you're embarrassed about it for no reason. You tap your pen against the edge of your notepad when you're thinking, and when you're annoyed. Different rhythms. I can tell the difference. You've read every major regulatory filing in our sector for the last 3 years, because you don't like being the person in the room who doesn't have the full picture. And somewhere in the last year, you became the person I think about when something goes wrong, because you're the one who makes it manageable. He stopped. So yes, he said, feelings. I kissed him. I'd had a whole separate conversation running in my head, something careful, something that acknowledged the complexity and the power differential, and the 11 other reasons this required more thinking. That conversation got set aside, because sometimes the most intelligent thing to do is act before the overthinking catches up. He went still for one breath. Then his hands came up to frame my face, careful and then less careful, and he kissed me back with what felt like 2 years of exceptionally well-maintained professional distance finally losing the argument. We broke apart, both breathing a little unsteadily. That was exceptionally unprofessional, he said. His voice was different, quieter. I know, I'm your employer. There are about 14 legal frameworks that make this complicated. I know that too. A sound that was almost a laugh. And you did it anyway. I thought we were being honest about what things are. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he kissed me again, shorter this time, like punctuation. Saturday. Nathan's going to contact you about meeting. When he does, we'll have everything in place. His voice had the edge of strategy back in it, but underneath it something warmer. And after. When this is finished, I'm taking you somewhere that doesn't have a conference room in it, and we're going to figure out what this looks like when it isn't operating under conditions of active corporate espionage. That's a reasonable plan. It's the best plan I've made in years. Saturday's message arrived at 11:42 a.m. Nathan Grigg proposing dinner at a restaurant in the West Village, a place I'd been to twice and liked, which told me he'd done his research on that too. Cole briefed me for 2 hours. I wore a navy dress, professional but not severe, and a recording device that sat flush under my collar. Cole's team was already in the restaurant when I arrived, positioned with the practiced casualness of people who were very good at not looking like what they were. Nathan stood when he saw me, and I understood immediately why the whole thing had seemed almost plausible from a distance. He was polished, good-looking in a way that read as approachable rather than threatening easy smile, the kind of manners that were taught early and maintained deliberately. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said as I took my seat. I'm curious. I accepted the menu. About a lot of things. Such as why someone who apparently runs a $200 million fund spent 4 months following a hedge fund's executive assistant to coffee shops. He didn't flinch, which confirmed he was prepared for me to be smarter than he'd hoped. I saw you at an event last fall, a fundraiser for the Literacy Foundation. You were running the volunteer coordination, the way you managed that room. You were handling a problem every 8 minutes, and you made it look effortless. Then I found out who you worked for, and I became interested. In what, exactly? In you, in what it must be like to be the operational brain of Westfield Capital while getting credit for being an assistant. His expression sharpened slightly under the easy charm. You're doing the work of a chief of staff, minimum. You're probably making $60,000, $70,000 a year while the people you enable make bonuses that size quarterly. He was right, and he knew I knew it. That was the opening. Find the truth that stings and lean on it. I manage my own expectations, I said. The role has other value. Learning? Access? Nathan leaned forward slightly. Or is it something more personal? I've heard things about how Westfield operates. Small circle. Deep loyalty. The people he keeps close, he keeps very close. The implication hung in the air, delicate and deliberate. He was testing whether I'd be offended or whether I'd confirm it. You seem very interested in my employer's professional habits, I said. Is there a reason? Only that I'm interested in you, and understanding your situation is part of that. He reached for his wine glass. I'll be direct, since you clearly prefer it. My father's fund and Westfield Capital have a complicated history. 3 years ago, there was a partnership discussion that ended very badly. From our side, my father spent 2 years unwinding the damage. I've spent the last year trying to understand whether Archer Westfield is someone we can do business with again, or a permanent liability. And you thought asking his assistant was the right approach. I thought getting to know you first was the right approach, because you're the one who actually knows how he operates. He set down his glass. I'd like to compensate you for that knowledge. An honest consulting arrangement. Your assessment of Westfield's fund practices, his risk tolerance, who he's in contact with at the regulatory level, nothing illegal, just insight from someone with direct experience. There it was. The packaging was elegant. Consulting, honest, assessment, but underneath it was the same transaction. How much, I said, keeping my voice level. $150, up front. Separate account, no paper trail connecting it to Meridian Crest. He smiled. The charm dialed up now that he thought I was considering it. Think of it as finally being paid what you're worth, Ro. He'd used my nickname. I didn't know how he knew it, and the fact that he did made something cold move through me. I'll need time to think about this, I said. Of course. He reached across the table and briefly covered my hand with his. But don't take too long. The conversation I'm trying to have with Westfield Capital doesn't wait indefinitely. I rode home in Cole's SUV, watching the city lights slide past, and allowed my hands to shake for approximately 90 seconds before I called Archer. He offered $150 to hand over your regulatory contacts and fund positions, I said when he picked up. Cash, separate account, no trail. On record? Crystal, clear. A pause. You were extraordinary. He used my nickname, I know. Cole's already pulling the thread on how he got it. Good. I pressed my forehead briefly against the cool window glass. Archer, I want to finish this. I'm calling the prosecutor tonight. The recording plus the Meridian Crest transaction analysis we've been building. It's enough for a wire fraud charge minimum. He'll be arrested before he can move the money. What happens to the fund? Meridian is a client. Was a client. His voice was steady. We're ending that relationship Monday. The investors will be notified that we identified irregularities and referred the matter to authorities. That protects them. It protects us. A pause. You did the right thing, Ro. Don't thank me yet. You still owe me a conversation. I haven't forgotten. Nathan Grigg was arrested on Wednesday morning. Archer's attorney had spent 3 days building the referral package for the U.S. Attorney's Office, the recording, the transaction analysis, 18 months of circumstantial evidence that now had a clear centerpiece. Conrad Grigg retained counsel by noon. By Thursday, the story was in the financial press, framed around securities fraud in the private equity sector, with Westfield Capital mentioned as the firm that had identified and reported the activity. Archer's phone rang continuously for 48 hours. I fielded what I could, routed the rest, and somewhere in the middle of it all, he appeared at my desk at 7 in the evening, when the office was empty, and set a cup of coffee in front of me. 2 sugars, he said. I know you prefer to add it yourself, but the machine was doing something strange. I looked at the cup, then at him. Are you making me coffee? I'm establishing new professional norms. He sat on the edge of my desk, which he had never done in 2 years. We said we'd talk when this was over. We did. I owe you an apology. For October. For deciding unilaterally that I could manage a threat to your safety without telling you it existed. He said it directly, no hedging, the way he did everything when he'd already made a decision. That was wrong. You were the one at risk, and you deserved to know. Yes, I said. You should have told me. I know. He looked at me. I also need to tell you that, what I said in the conference room, it wasn't the whole truth. What's the rest? The rest is that I've been managing my feelings about you with the same approach I use for most problems, which is to contain them, assess the risk, and wait for a better moment. And there was never a better moment, and Nathan Grigg sending you flowers made me understand that waiting for a better moment was its own kind of risk. His jaw tightened briefly. The thought of him sitting across from you, using those words, trying to make you feel unseen so that he could use you, Archer, is not something I handled especially rationally. You handled it fine. I picked up the coffee cup. Mostly. The flowers. We don't need to discuss the flowers. I told building security to throw them out before I'd thought it through. You really did. I looked at him over the rim of the cup, but I understood it, and I'm choosing to attribute it to the right cause. He was quiet for a moment. What happens now? Now you take me somewhere that isn't a conference room, and we figure out what we are when we're not managing a crisis. I set down the cup and looked at him steadily. I want to be honest with you about something, though. I've been watching how you operate for 2 years. I know who you are professionally, brilliant, fair, harder on yourself than anyone around you, loyal to the people who earn it. What I don't know as well yet is who you are when you're not in the building, and I want to know that. Not just the fund manager, the person. That person is also a lot of work, he said. Worse about communication than the professional version, more stubborn. I'm not easily intimidated, no. Something in his expression softened, just slightly, just enough. That's one of the things. 2 weeks later, he took me to a house he owned on the coast of Maine. Not a compound, not an estate, just a house, cedar-shingled, 3 bedrooms, a deck that faced the water. It turned out that Archer Westfield, away from the office, made excellent coffee without being asked, read for 2 hours every morning before he was ready to speak, and had a habit of pointing out things he found structurally interesting. Bridges, buildings, boats, with the specific enthusiasm of someone who'd spent years having no one to tell. He was also, as promised, worse about communication. He went quiet when things bothered him instead of saying so, which I decided to treat as a solvable problem, rather than an immovable fact. "You're thinking something," he said on the second evening, both of us on the deck with the water going dark in front of us. "I'm thinking that you go somewhere internal when you're worried about something, and I'm going to need a signal for when that happens, so I know whether to give you space or whether to push." He considered this. A signal, something small, doesn't have to be verbal. He reached over and touched 2 fingers to the back of my hand, light, brief, a period at the end of a sentence. "That," he said. "That means I'm in my head. Give me 10 minutes, that works." We sat with the sound of the water for a while. "I need to tell you something," he said eventually, "about what Nathan's operation actually found. What he had at the end. It wasn't just proximity to you. He'd gotten inside one of our investor communications channels. We found it when we pulled his activity logs after the arrest." He turned to look at me. "It wasn't your fault. He exploited a gap in our external email protocol. Nothing you had access to or responsibility for. But you're going to hear about it when the full picture comes out, and I wanted you to hear it from me first." I let that settle. How bad is the exposure? Manageable. We've already patched the gap and notified the affected investors. The SEC's focus is on Nathan, not on us, but it's a gap that existed for 8 months and I missed it, which means I need to rebuild the external protocol from scratch. He paused. "I thought you might have thoughts on that." "I have a lot of thoughts on that." "I know." For the first time in a while, something that was almost a smile. "That's why I'm telling you." I built the new external communications protocol over the following month, working with Cole's security team and an outside consultant, Archer, brought in from a firm that specialized in financial sector cyber infrastructure. It was the most genuinely interesting problem I'd worked on at Westfield, because it required understanding not just the technical structure, but the human behavior that created the vulnerabilities. How people sent messages when they were rushed. How handoff points between systems created gaps that looked like nothing until they were something. By the time we were done, I'd been asked 3 times by the consultant whether I'd considered moving into information security. Archer found me in the conference room at 8 on a Friday evening, the last one before the new protocol went live, reviewing the final documentation. "You could have left an hour ago," he said from the doorway. "I know." I looked up. I wanted to finish the index, for the next person who has to understand this. He came in and sat across from me. Not the CEO posture, just him, comfortable and tired in a way that was different from the tight-wound tired of the crisis months. "I've been thinking about your employment situation. Which aspect of it? All of it. You've been operating as an executive assistant for 2 years. You built the Hargrove disclosure revision, the Meridian account documentation, the investor communication audit, and now the external protocol framework." He set his hands flat on the table. "I'd like to offer you a different title. Chief of Staff, formally, with the compensation that goes with it, and the actual authority to match what you already do. No more filtering everything through the assistant language." I looked at him for a long moment. "Because of us," I said. "Or because of the work?" "Because of the work, which is the cleaner answer. The other answer is that us made it impossible for me to keep pretending the current arrangement was appropriate in any direction. He held my gaze. I should have done it earlier. Before Nathan, before any of it. You've been doing this job for a year and a half. You didn't offer it earlier. No. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because changing the title meant acknowledging everything attached to it, and I wasn't ready. I pulled the documentation folder closed. I'll take the title. I want the scope in writing. Clear reporting lines, defined authority, the whole structure. Not because I don't trust you, but because ambiguity is how things get complicated later. I'll have legal draft it Monday. Good. I stood gathering my coat. And Archer, don't do that again. Don't hold something back because you're not ready. If it affects me, I get to know. Yes, he said. You've mentioned that. I'll keep mentioning it until it sticks. I know. The almost smile again. That's also one of the things. 8 months after Nathan Griggs' arrest, I was sitting in a deposition room on the 38th floor of a federal building in Lower Manhattan, giving testimony to an assistant U.S. attorney about the events of the preceding year. It took 4 hours and covered everything. The flowers, the dinner, the recording, the communications breach, the full timeline. When it was done, I stepped out into the hallway and found Archer leaning against the wall with 2 coffees. He handed one to me without a word. 2 sugars, I said. I've been paying attention. We walked out into the November afternoon, the city going gray and fast around us. And I thought about what it meant to have spent 2 years, being invisible and useful, and then to have become, through a stranger's calculated attention and a familiar person's complicated feelings, someone who could not be ignored. Nathan pled guilty in March. Conrad Griggs' fund was unwound by the SEC over a period of 6 months. The investors who'd been harmed got most of their money back. I was named Chief of Staff at Westfield Capital in a press release 3 financial newsletters picked up, which meant that for the first time in 2 years, people in our sector knew I existed. Archer read me one of the newsletter mentions at breakfast on a Sunday in April. We'd been doing Sundays, unofficially, at his apartment because it had better light than mine, and he'd figured out my coffee order. They call you the architect of Westfield's compliance overhaul, he said. Is that accurate? Entirely. He set down the newsletter. How does it feel? I thought about the question. About 38 months of careful invisibility, of making myself exactly the right size, of the lobby and the flowers and the cold conference room where he'd told me I mattered more than was strategically wise. It feels right, I said. It took a while, but it feels right. He reached across the table, 2 fingers on the back of my hand, brief and certain. Not the signal, for I'm in my head. Just contact. Just the small, specific language we'd built between us over 8 months of figuring out what we were when we weren't managing a crisis. Good, he said. It should.